Hello, good evening. Hi. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Klallam Nisklallam, meaning the strong people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and who are the original peoples of this land. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land, and we honor their ancestors, past, present, and future, and recognize their continued contributions to society. And thank you all for coming out tonight for this community conversation. My name is Steve Rader Ginsberg, and I'm the Executive and Artistic Director here at Field Arts and Events Hall. And I want to thank all of you who have made this event possible. Many of you have decided to contribute and donate when you receive this free ticket. I also want to thank Joe Floyd and Barbara Noble for their sponsorship of the community conversations, without whom I would not have known about Stuart Elway. I want to also thank the Maitland Manor Bed and Breakfast, who are our lodging partner for this event tonight, as well as First Fed. This is called the First Fed Community Conversation. And First Fed was one of the first corporate partners that we had when we were building, and this place was just a vision. And when we were in discussions with First Fed and they were asking us, what do you think this place will be? We said, it is a home for our community to come together and grow stronger. And they said, well, that's the same mission we have as being a community bank serving this area for 100 years now. And so together we decided with their contribution, this would be named Community Conversations. And hopefully by the end of tonight, we can have an experience together that has brought us together, been thought-provoking and inspiring, and leave here feeling more connected and better to understand each other as a community. There are great things coming up here at Field Arts and Events Hall. If you're not on our mailing list, you can sign up on our homepage, fieldhallevents.org. Sign up for our mailing list and hear about future community conversations or concerts like we have this Friday. We have something that I think you'll all enjoy. There's an artist named Jamie Stone, and he has a project called America's Folk Life. So what he did was he was invited by the Smithsonian to be part of the Alan Lomax archives. Alan Lomax was the first ethnomusicologist that this country had, and he drove all across and all around to remote areas of America, collecting on wax records in his Model T Ford old Americana music. And so he's brought those back, recomposed them, and is traveling with a trio of some of forgotten treasures that our country has come up with. So please come this Friday and hear some of that original music. To introduce tonight's guest speaker for our community, Stuart Elway, I am going to ask a fellow friend and board member and leader of our community, Bruce Skinner, on stage. Thank you, Bruce. Please give Bruce a hand.
Thanks, Steve. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker tonight. And it's a great pleasure because Stuart and I actually met in 1964 at a YMCA high school leadership camp in Oregon. And because he was the nephew of Port Angeles high school football coach at that time, Jack Elway, we became friends. And in fact, he came up and visited me and actually stayed at our house. We lived at Lake Sutherland at the time. Then we went 55 years without seeing each other. We finally reconnected in 2019, but I always followed his career, and an incredible career it's been. For 16 years, between 1984 and 2000, the results of Elway polls was in the Seattle Times often, and he has been quoted extensively in the media, not only in the state of Washington, but throughout the country. He's been quoted in every major newspaper in the country, and as I said, has had a real incredible career. Is one of the top pollsters in the country. 538.com gave out 6 A-pluses to pollsters in the country, and he was one of them. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce you to Stuart Elway.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I guess not much on TV tonight. And congratulations on this spectacular facility. I got here early enough to get a real tour, and this is really something, a little bit intimidating, I must say. As Bruce mentioned, I grew up in Hoquiam, so I have some history with Port Angeles. As he told you, my Uncle Jack was the football and basketball coach here back in the day, but if he were here, we'd be meeting in the back room of trailers. We wouldn't be meeting in a place like this. My dad's business brought him up here, and I'd travel with him up in the summertime, sometimes on business trips. And as Bruce mentioned, he and I, the YMCA's of Aberdeen and Hoquiam and Port Angeles used to do a lot of things together. And Bruce and I met when we were 15 years old, about 20 years ago now, I think. So I don't think it can't be that long already. And then I lost the Youth and Government Governor's Chair to Pete Lawrence from here. Great guy. I think I probably voted for him. And finally, I chased Art Sanderson around the track a few times back in the day, and I still don't know what the front of him looks like. Oh, and I had a couple of summer romances here, but I'm not going to name check those. They ended badly. So I have some emotional scars that I'm still trying to work through. But what's really great is to be here, not only in this facility, but as you all know, in the only county in the country to get the presidential race right every time for the last 40 years. I think of all the money I could have saved if I hadn't had to call all those people all these years. I'd come here, hang out at trailers, talk to you guys, and man. Well, so what I'm going to do tonight is kind of trace the history, recent history of Washington State, how it went from a purple state, a swing state. It wasn't that long ago. And actually, in the year 2000, Washington was considered a swing state. It was on the list of swing states. George Bush he campaigned out here, and he's spending money until late in the year, and then he took off and went to Ohio and spent all his money, campaign time there. But we were a swing state in those days, and now, of course, we're pretty reliably blue. So we want to look at that. So this first chart, I feel like I should have brought a cello or something in this place instead of a PowerPoint. You know? And I've never seen my slides this big before. This is real. I'm going to come around this way. This is the presidential race, presidential elections back in 1968, Washington State. And as you see, we voted for Hubert Humphrey in 68, then 4 Republicans in a row, including Ronald Reagan twice. I used to win bets in bars by saying who got the highest percentage of votes in Washington State ever, and it was Richard Nixon until Obama in 2008. So I quit betting in 2008. But Washington, so here we go. From 1984, voting for Reagan, to 1988, we voted for Dukakis and have never looked back. So, and my theory of that is that in 1988, the Washington State Republican Party sent a delegation to the National Convention and to vote for Pat Robertson for president instead of H.W. Bush. And so Washington has not voted for a Republican since in that time. Pat Buchanan declared the culture war in the 1992 GOP convention, and the Republicans have been losing the culture war in Washington state ever since. The vote for governor looks similar. We voted for Dan Evans for 3 times, of course, and then Dixie Lee Ray, and then Spellman, and Spellman was the last Republican elected. So Washington split the ticket between Republican and Democrat governor and president in 1960, 64, 68, 76, 84, and not since. Spellman, as I say, was the last governor elected Republican in 1980. The average vote since 1984 has been 55% Democratic, 44% Republican for governor. The open seats are much closer. You see there, 2012, Jay Inslee beat Rob McKenna by 3 points, 51-48. And then in 2004, of course, we had the closest governor's race in United States history when Christine Gregoire beat Dino Rossi by 133 votes on the third recount. Or was it 127 votes? We're still not sure exactly. Our congressional delegation has shown a somewhat similar pattern. It was pretty well balanced through the 60s into the 80s. In 1992, Democrats won everything in Washington state. We won 8 out of the 9 congressional seats at that time. We won 6 out of the 8 statewide executive offices. I mean the Democrats did. And then in 1994, we executed the political pirouette of going from 8-1 Democrat in our congressional delegation to 7-2 Republican. That was the year of the Gingrich Revolution. And actually, Newt Gingrich called Washington ground zero of his revolution because no other state turned so far in that year of 1994. If you look at the votes across all 9 districts, all Republicans and Democratic, so 18 races, 9 races, 2 parties, the total vote statewide was only 37,000 vote difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, and yet the Republicans won 7 seats with that 37,000 vote margin. So it was broad but shallow. And as you see, Democrats have been gaining seats back ever since, with the one exception of the 2010 Obama midterms when it was back to 5-4, but now it's 8-2 Democrat advantage in our congressional delegation. The state officers, we elect, as you know, anybody who's in this room tonight knows this stuff. We elect 8 executives in their state by party: governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, auditor, treasurer, state, lands commissioner, and insurance commissioner. From 1980 to 1988, Republicans won 14 out of the 24 races you see along there. Since 1988, the Republicans have won another 14. Meanwhile, the Democrats have won 51 of the races, to the place where we now have no Republican statewide elected officials. Kim Wyman was that one you see down at the end there until she resigned, and now there are none. She in fact, was the only statewide elected Republican official on the West Coast when she left, and now there are none. So it's not just Washington. This is the total vote for the House of Representatives for the state. Now, as you know, each district, 49 districts, elect 2 representatives each. So I totaled all those votes for these years because it gives us probably the most granular look of how the votes really shake out here in partisan terms. So between 1992 and 2000, the average vote was a 2-point advantage for the Democrats, 50 to 48 in total. And as you see, they went back and forth a few times on who had the majority seats in the House. Since 2000, the average is +9 for the Democrats, 54 to 45% average. There was one, they tied a couple of times. Essentially, they tied in 2002 and again in 2014, but those did not result in GOP House majorities. The Democrats have held the majority in the House of Representatives in Washington since 2002. The Senate has had a little more of a swing. The Republicans have had the majority 7 times in the last 24 years, but the last time the Democrats have had majority since 2017. For years in Washington State, we talked about the Cascade Curtain. That was sort of the model of politics in Washington State. The eastern part of the state was all Republican, the western part of the state was all Democrat, and that's how it looked. Well, that has morphed over the last few years, and I want to show you some of that. What's happening in Washington is happening nationwide and was documented in this book. It came out in 2008 by Bill Bishop called The Big Sort. And essentially, as he says in the subtitle, why the clustering of like-minded America is tearing us apart. So about 4 to 5% of the U.S. population moves to a different county every year. So that's about 100 million people in a decade that move counties. And what he sees happening is the people are moving more into more like to move to areas that people like them live. So in what happens in the last congressional election, of the 435 congressional districts, only 16 split their ticket between Republican and Democrat, voted for congressman of one party and the presidential candidate of another. None in Washington, none in Oregon, none in Idaho, probably none in California if I didn't look. Joe Biden in 2020 won more votes but won fewer counties than any president in U.S. history. Single-party counties, that is, counties where the presidential candidate wins by 80% or more, increased from 81 in year 2000 to 476 in 2020. There are about 3,600 counties in the country. 60% of counties voted 20% or more for the margin for the winning candidate for president. That was 4% in 2004, 20% last time. In Washington State, just 38% of the counties voted like that. That's 15 out of 39. You can see the big sort at work here, and there'll be some more of this. So in 1984, the last time we voted for a Republican for president, Ronald Reagan carried 34 counties in Washington State and got 56% of the vote. In 2020, Donald Trump carried 13 counties in Washington State and got 36% of the vote. One of the big changes, obviously in this map, the Central Puget Sound changed, but one of the big changes was along the coast. My old stomping grounds of Grace Harbor started to vote for Republican. Grace Harbor had not voted for a Republican since Herbert Hoover. And that worked out real well for them. So they voted for Donald Trump as well and have started to vote Republican. And it's the same kind of thing we're seeing nationally. And you see the difference here. So Tiffany Smiley, who ran for Senate last time, and Lauren Culp, who ran for Republican for governor last time, each got 43% of the vote. They got the same vote. They each won 12 of the 13 counties that Trump won and no others. So the red and blue map is fairly hard in Washington. So Republicans, for times, have started talking about the emerald curtain instead of the cascade curtain, and started to see that the central Puget Sound was pretty blue, and so they would run against Seattle. Forget about Seattle. We'll try and get as many as we can there, but concentrate on winning in the suburbs and in the rural areas, maximize our votes there. Tiffany Smiley even ran TV ads against the Seattle Mariners and against Starbucks, which is guaranteed to win the hearts and minds of people in the Puget Sound area. So here's another look at it. This is Patty Murray's election in 2004, where she won 55% of the vote, winning 18 counties. And this is the classic cascade curtain. All blue on one side, all red on the other side, except for Lewis County there, which I always sort of thought of as Eastern or Republicans giving the finger to Western Washington. It just kind of looked that way. So in 2022, just last time, Murray got 57% of the vote and won only 12 counties. So she got more votes and in fewer counties, just as Biden had done nationally. But this starts to show the urban rural sort of divide as opposed to the east-west. The cascade curtain doesn't really describe the state's attitudes anymore. As the urban attitudes, so-called, are sort of flowing out from the city into the suburbs and the surrounding counties. And you can see if we had an electoral college by county, the Republicans would win every time. Republicans win all the acres and the Democrats win the votes. As this map shows, I like this map, no political boundaries on here. These are actual households in Washington State, sorted by red and blue. And one thing, it shows where the population is and how much empty area there is in this state, empty of people, that is. And this is why the Republicans have had trouble with their anti-urban strategy. 60% of the state's voters live inside that circle. And Scoop Jackson said, probably 60 years ago, I can see all the voters I need from the top of the Space Needle. And that's even more accurate now. And the central Puget Sound counties got 66% of all the growth that came to the state between the census of 2000 and the census of 2020. So the trend is even more concentration. A little more granular view. Here we are. The local map sort of will illustrate the sorting a little bit more that we're talking about, along with fragmented information sources that we all have now and we hear about all the time. We're just less likely to encounter people who don't think like us. As we move into areas we want to be around people like us, the chance encounters of other people people who are not like us are smaller. And let me show you this. This is Seattle. So you can see you folks here in Clallam County, I think this may explain why you get the presidential race right. You're much more likely to encounter people who don't think like you than, people in Seattle, we just don't run into Republicans in the Safeway. You see a few red dots up there. But it is 75% Democrat vote in Seattle. And Seattle is 10% of the state's population. So this is another aspect of it. This is a headline from a newspaper not long ago, and you can tell this is real. If people are trying to make money off it, then this is a real phenomenon. So here are realtors luring conservatives to come to Idaho. And guess what? The Secretary of State of Idaho did a study recently and looked at 20,000 people who recently moved from Washington State to Idaho, and 62% of them registered as Republicans when they got there, and only 12% Democrats. And of the Californians, it was 80% who registered as a Democrat when they got there. So the most profound aspect of this big sort is not that people want to live by people like them, that's not new, but it's the consequence of this sorting, which is more single-party districts. Because people are sorting themselves politically, not just geographically, more districts and jurisdictions are represented by just one party, as I mentioned earlier. And in a one-party district, candidates aren't worried about getting beat by the person from the other party. They're more worried about getting primaried. They're more worried about somebody over their shoulder who may have a more extreme position than they do. So if elected officials never have to appeal to voters of the other party, their positions will narrow. So, and the districts get bluer, the blue districts get bluer, the red districts get redder. So Washington State, we like to think we are immune to the worst of the national trends, and to a large extent we are. But here are legislative districts in Washington State in 1980. So every district has 3 members that it sends to Olympia, 1 senator, 2 representatives. In 1980, 20 of the state's 49 districts were represented by at least 1 legislator from each party. So 20 purple districts, 13 were all Democrat, 16 were all Republican, 1980. By 2020, there are only 4 purple districts left in Washington State. And as a matter of fact, now there's only 3 because one of those purples turned blue in the 2022 election. And the result of that is there are no Republican legislators from King County. And there are no Democrats from Eastern Washington, except in the city of Spokane. And I think 1 that borders on Spokane. In 2022, 2/3 of the legislators in Washington State won by 60% or more, further indicating the weakness of party competition. So as you see, if they're trying to get things done in Olympia, the legislators are separated not only by party, but by geography, and as we'll see, by more than that. So underlying these changes in election results are changes in party identification. So as you know, in Washington State, we do not register by party. The only time you have to declare your party is when I call you on the phone and ask you what your party is. Or if you vote in the presidential primary, you have to declare, at least for that day, that you're a member of a party or not. But I have been asking people how they would register if you were registered, if we had to register by party in order to vote. How would you register here in Washington State? I've been asking 400 or 500 people that question 5 or 10 times a year since 1992. This is my favorite slide. As you can clearly see, party identification is a bit of a variable here in Washington. But there is a trend. This averages the party ID, the answers to, I got to those questions over the course of presidential administrations. So it's average for the entire time the president was in office. The parties in 1990s were basically even, as you see, 31-29, 2-point Democrat advantage. Since 2020, that gap has been widening from 2 points to now there's a 16-point gap when I ask this question between people who will register, would identify with, would register as a Democrat versus would register as a Republican. The Republican identification answers to that question has not been at 30% since October of 2012. And it has not averaged 30% for a full year since 2006. The GOP, it surged, the GOP identification surged in the beginning of 2022. Remember, that was going to be the red wave, the last midterms. The gap went from 17 at that point down to 7. Then immediately, and I mean immediately, after the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court, which overturned Roe v. Wade, the Republican surge collapsed. Democrats bounced back to a 17-point advantage and have been there ever since. So this is the most recent. This is average over 3 surveys I did in December, January. So 41% to 26% Democrat advantage, 33% are independent. They say they would register as independent. We always get a large number there in Washington. So a 15-point advantage. But this time we asked people not only how would you register, but when you go to the polls, how do you typically vote? And that broke out fairly evenly too. Democrats added a couple of points. Republicans added 9. So the self-reported Democrat voters have a 17-point advantage over self-reported Republican voters, 52 to 35 if you count all the blue and red there. And the historical results, like those chart I showed you earlier of the total House vote, indicates that the bulk of that last 14% goes to Republicans, because the average House vote since 2000 has been Democrat +8, 53 to 45. So I mentioned earlier about this sorting. This is a book came out in 2018 by Alan Abramowitz. He looked at 40 years of polling and election data in Washington, across the United States, to conclude that the parties have sorted themselves as never before by geography, as we've been seeing, but also by gender, education, by race, by age, and by ideology. So in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the Vietnam War and the protests and support for that started to divide people along demographic lines in ways they hadn't been before. Older people and younger people had different ideas about these things. Men and women had different ideas about these things. People of color and Caucasians had different ideas about these things. And those have continued to divide. People have sorted into those things and into the parties, that is relatively new also. So here's some changes in Washington State that illustrate that. So from 2000 to 2023, among voters under 50 years old, there was a 30-point net swing toward Democrats in my party ID question. So in 2000, it was even. By 2023, there was a huge gap in favor of the Democrats. Democrats added 24 points, Republicans lost 6 points, total of 30-point swing in just one generation. Among women, there was a 15-point swing. In King County, there was a 22-point swing. Among people with college degrees, a 22-point swing. As you see, net shift. As you see, college-educated voters were even in 2000, and now more than 20-point gap between Republicans and Democrats among people with college degrees. There is no shift that looks like this going the other way on any demographic. And we're in Washington State, where we're among the highest educated population in the country. 52% of the voters in Washington are women. The average age of the voters in Washington is going down, and King County is growing faster than any place else. So the trends don't look good. And as I say, there's no shift in the opposite direction, so it's not promising at this point for the GOP. So these demographics, what's underlying now, we see a shift in votes, a shift in identity. What's underlying that? Well, the shift in party ID is reflected in national demographic trends. They signify changes in the nature of party identification itself. The demographics are an aspect of a person's identity. It's their definition of who they are. Age, gender, ethnicity, even religion. These are things that are not as changeable as opinions about issues or candidates. Importantly, as Abramowitz pointed out in that book, aspects of people's identity are now being extraordinarily sorted. So it's not just attitudes or philosophy. To an unprecedented degree, voters don't pick the party that fits their philosophy. They align with the party that matches their identity and then form their policy preferences to line up with the dominant views in the party that they've chosen. There was a time when politics did not define one's identity, but in a large part, and this is certainly not everybody, but a large trend across the country, party identification has gone from being a preference to an identity to a dominant identity. More people today would oppose their child marrying someone from another party than marrying someone from a different race. Ezra Klein likens the political identity to like a stack of magnets. Each magnet has, this is the race magnet, this is my gender magnet. When you stack them up, they're hard to separate. So a threat to any one of them becomes a threat to all of them, and they're all now subsumed to a greater degree than ever before in party identity, which starts to explain why everything seems political these days and politics is polarized. In the before times, both parties were big tents. There were people of different backgrounds, interests, philosophies in each party. Both parties had their ideological wings, but they were just one of several factions or groups within a party. And these factions within the party created overlap, both within and between the parties. So in the olden days, Republicans and Democrats might disagree. They would disagree with each other, then they disagree with the Republicans on some issues and not on others, and we agree on this. But they all got together at the Rotary Club or at church or at trailers. Keeps coming back to that. So as the parties have sorted and become more ideologically, I don't want to say pure, coherent, the populist wings of each party now asserts more influence, which has resulted in the center of gravity of each party moving away from what used to be the middle. So there is no longer any such animal as a liberal Republican or a conservative Democrat. Patrick Moynihan once said that you are entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own facts. And that statement now just seems quaint. We used to like that a lot, and now parties seem to be operating on a different set of facts, which harden into what people consider knowledge. Knowledge, it becomes not facts as we normally have understood them, but the shared beliefs of a group. Alternative facts, in Kellyanne Conway's famous description. Modern neuroscience shows us that the acceptance of shared beliefs not only solidifies group cohesion, it makes me feel more part of the group, but it actually changes opinions. Loyalty is demonstrated by belief. The more outrageous the so-called fact, the stronger the loyalty is demonstrated by professing it. Thus, Republicans and Democrats trade positions on the budget deficit, on Russia, on the FBI, on the economy, whether the sky is blue, depending on which party is in the White House. As the parties have become more sorted, disagreement over policy automatically it becomes a partisan disagreement. And partisan disagreement, because our identities are so wrapped up in it now, are seen as values differences, thus threatening our identity. So the politics becomes more tribal. We've been hearing that term a lot, and this starts to explain what that really means. It's more us versus them, which is a very powerful psychological trigger. In a poll last month, these are Washington State voters, 9 out of 10 of the people in each party consider the candidate of the other party to be a danger to democracy. Not a guy with some bad ideas, not an old guy, but a danger to democracy. So what that leads to is a negative partisanship gets defined as negative partisanship. The tribal parties define themselves in negative terms. I may not like my candidate, but I hate yours. So Trump wins because he's not Hillary. Biden wins because he's not Trump. I'm for X because they resent the same people I resent. And the toxic consequence of this is the demonization of the other party. So what used to be worthy opponents are now dangers to democracy. All of this makes it difficult to impossible to reach a compromise on policy. Demonization of the other party leads to the notion that compromise is capitulation. And it's capitulation to people who want to destroy your way of life. Tactically, tribalism leads to end justifies the means politics. When the other side is out to destroy America, as we believe they are, then anything goes to stop them. We have a moral imperative to do everything we can to stop them, even if we have to break some rules to do it. So politics based on us versus them, a tribal identity, not based on rational debate over public policy or where we're going in the country, but it's based on identity and hating the other side. So it never ends. The party that's slightly in power or doesn't want to cooperate with the other party because they want to keep the issue alive so they can campaign on it in the next election, so they can win the slim majorities. All of this leads to a corrosion of norms. I call it. Norms are accepted practices and unspoken guidelines and guardrails that we all live our lives by. In things that we thought were taboo or political third rails are nowadays not only not taboo, they are powerful generators of political energy and support. This erosion of norms may be the most dangerous development of all. The founders believed that democracy depended upon virtue among the citizens. By virtue, what they meant was behaving in ways that promote the greater good. It's not every person for themselves. Liberty exists within a system. Liberty is not license. Chief among the democratic virtues that they founded the country on were trust, tolerance, and forbearance. You trust in the institutions of government. You trust that your political opponents are also patriots that are acting in honorable ways. You tolerate opposing viewpoints and different ways of life. You don't do anything or everything you can think of in order to win. You forbear. And when these democratic norms are no longer in force, it makes it very difficult for democracy to function as it should. So, pretty great, huh? Everybody really glad you came now? So where does that leave us? The road ahead. Buckle up. The short answer is we don't know. We're in a period of turmoil and impasse. There are fault lines in our system that have been exposed that must be addressed, and we have to address them. The founders designed the system of divided control with checks and balances, which we all learned a long time ago. The system is designed to force debate and compromise. Two things that the founders were most wary of were democracy and strong parties. But parties were already being formed before George Washington ever left office. Parties have proven to be essential to a democracy. They organize choices for voters. A healthy party competition is necessary. But we now have two polarized parties that think that the other side, the other party, poses an existential threat to the nation, and a partisan atmosphere that regards compromise as some form of treason. We've entered into an era of performative politics symbolized by manufactured outrage to stoke fear and loathing around symbolic issues in order to energize the party base. Because everyday citizens are not in the activist factions that are driving the parties. This all seems disconnected to the things that we really care about. More and more voters feel less and less represented more and more of the time. A growing number of Americans don't want to be identified with either party, which just leaves the field to the activists and the radicals. The country is divided largely because this two-party system that we're working with have moved further and further apart, and the choice we have is between the Democrat and the Republican. You may not agree, you probably don't agree with everything one candidate says or the other candidate says, but everything they stand for, but you have to pick one or the other, and you get the bundle. It's like cable. You can't just get ESPN, you got to buy the whole cable. So much of the time, the choice feels like it's a choice between the lesser of two evils, which fosters a growing distrust in the institutions and in the democratic process. I asked people in these recent polls I've been citing to two different things. How do you think America's political system is working? If you were to give it a grade, what grade would you give it? 62% said D or F. 33% gave it an F. How about you? If I brought that report card home, I wouldn't be going to the dance on Saturday. And then 89% said they are worried about the future of democracy. 63% agreed strongly that they are worried about that. So both parties are in the midst of internal struggles between populists and centrists for the control of their parties. That's going on in both parties. And we expect those internal battles to go on for the foreseeable future. The dynamics are playing out in ways and shaping the future in ways that we can't predict. But it's probably going to be a generation before the dust really settles. But in the meantime, we've got an election to run. We are on the eve of the most consequential election of our lifetime. Every election that I can remember, and I can remember a lot of them, have been billed as, oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime. This one seems like it really is. So locally, we have open seats in half of the 8 executive state offices, so guaranteed to have new people in at least 4 of those offices. All 8 of them are up, 4 of them are wide open, including the governor's race, which will be the marquee race in this state. Early polling, too early polling, indicates it's going to be a close race, as history also indicated. When we've had open seats before, the race has been close. But in my last poll, I didn't ask people to choose a candidate, but just asked, have you made up your mind, and could you vote for this candidate, or are there candidates you will not vote for? Only 25% had decided. And that's logical. It was, it was like January when I asked them. They don't have to decide yet. Of course, the Congress is up for grabs. 2 open seats, including the one here, is open. And the control of the state legislature is up. So I asked people, Democrats have been in total control. This isn't the wording of the question, but Democrats have been in control of the governor and both houses of representatives for almost 10 years. Which do you think is best for the state? And what this shows is about 53% said something other than Democrats should keep total control. 22% said it's important that the Democrats maintain control, while 18% over there said it's important that the Republicans take total control. And then that 25% in the middle said it'd be better if we split. And then I asked them, well, how do you usually vote? Or how are you planning to vote? 50% said, I'm going to vote for the Democrats. And 34% said, I'm going to vote for Republicans. But not all. So we will see how that plays out. And then, of course, nationally, we've got the race that nobody wants. Ironically, given the stakes of the presidential election, we have a race nobody seems to really want to have. This was Washington State voters, 27-25, Trump over Biden, and this was, again, within the last 6 weeks. Biden won Washington by 19 points, 58-39, in this poll in 2020. In this poll, he has 8-point advantage. Both Biden and Trump have about 2/3 of the support in this poll that they got in 2020, which indicates that now there are new voters involved, some, but this indicates to me that about 1/3 of the candidates' voters are hesitant to vote for them again. So we've got 16% still undecided, 23% said they want to vote for somebody else. And Washington State has a history of that as well. In 1992, Ross Perot got 24% here. We were the 2nd highest state. And who can forget that the Bull Moose Party carried the state in 1912? So we have precedent. But this will be the longest presidential campaign in history. Assuming these 2 guys are going to be the nominees, and there's no real reason to assume otherwise. We already know who the nominees are going to be, and it's only February. And they're the 2 most unpopular candidates in modern history. So you may or may not think this is an inspirational election, but it's the choice we have. And it's our duty to make it. And our choice will be consequential. And as the only county in the country to get the presidential right every time for the last 40 years, you have an awesome responsibility. So may the force be with you. Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. No answers, just questions.
I have a microphone here. Thank you very much, Stuart Elway, for this great presentation. So there's one microphone and one person running it. That's me. I will start right here, just by location. We see a hand up. And then I'll point to where I'm coming next.
Is there any polling on... Hi, my name is Bill Atkinson, and question is there any polling that would indicate that there's people, how many people in the country, in Washington and Port Angeles, believe that an armed insurrection is a good idea?
There isn't any polling in Washington State, but I think I saw some polling to the, and I'm going to try and do this from memory, so it was like 25% of Republicans polled thought that violence might be necessary to ensure the election. That's the only number I remember. But.
Robert Patterson, you have a lot of data. It would be very interesting to see some sort of a correlation between outside money spent on campaigns that is not related to the like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party expenditures, but these outside groups and the impact they have on the polarization. Yeah. If you could pull something out from that.
Yeah, well, that's a little outside of my ambit, but there have been studies done of course, of spending, and that's another part of the system that people are pretty sick of, but there seems to be no way to control it. The Supreme Court has decided that corporations are people and money is speech, and it's all free to free speech. So it can't be stopped. But I don't know about the actual polarization. I mean, it's certainly the people who care the most and have the big money are the ones who give the money. I mean, you don't see a lot of just moderates say, you know, I think I'm going to drop $1 million into this PAC just because it's great for democracy. It's always to win. So, I mean, it's a good question, but I don't know how to answer it.
Thank you. Jim Jones. Mr. Elway, thank you for coming. It's very interesting. Question I have is, I look around the room and I recognize a lot of faces here, but I'm struck by the fact that almost everybody in this room is older than 70 years old. There's almost nobody under 40. And it seems to me that that's wrong, and I'm just wondering if this is typical of the presentations that you see and you go to as you go around the state.
Well, you know, I have to say, this is the first time I have done just an open public presentation like this in a long time. I've given parts of this discussion to different groups, but I haven't really, so I was really interested to see how it was going to go. I'm looking for a factoid that I skipped over. That goes to that point. I want to get it right. And I'm not going to find it. So it is that Republicans, in those charts I was showing, Republicans have lost for a generation. 60% of the electorate in Washington State today was not eligible to vote the last time we voted for a Republican of our statewide office. And so it does reflect the fact that people who are, the other thing we find is that interest in politics and participation in politics generally goes up with age. Young people have big numbers, but they just don't vote in the same way. When we separate, sometimes we do polling of, and we look at voting history, so we have what we call perfect voters, people who vote every time. Something like 75% of them are over 65 years old in Washington State. And young people vote in the teens. So people under 35, their turnout will be 20% maybe. So that curve shows up, and I think that is reflected here. Now, in years like this, I'm going to start over now. Yeah, in presidential years, it goes up. There's higher participation. And Washington State has, I think our last presidential election, we had about 84% turnout, which is among the highest in the country. But it really varies. So more young people will turn out. However, the big question that everyone's asking is, will more young people turn out when the contest is between two octogenarians? They turned out for Barack Obama, but will they turn out again? And we don't know.
My name is Koya Erickson, and on that point, I guess that's one thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about is just the actual percentage of people that voted, as well as what do we do for the apathy that we see?
That's the eternal question. As I say, the turnout is higher. We're a pretty high voting state, but I think in the last off year we were under 50%. And so some of the things that I have been looking at and showed you some of here today is I think the root cause of that. The politics just don't seem to be, they're getting more fierce, but they aren't engaging people in a way that is meaningful to a lot of people's lives. And I don't know, if I had the answer to that question, I'd run for president. No, I'm the same age as those guys. It's the eternal question. I noticed that the League of Women Voters has their table out here, and they've been working forever on that question. How do you get people more involved? And there's no one answer, but somehow more inspiring, more engaging. What I meant to say, more engaging politics, more inspiring candidates would go a long way. But the politics have to meet people where they are.
Who pays for your polling, and could you give us some nuts and bolts of whether it's by phone or by focus groups?
Yeah. So I, as Bruce mentioned, for many years, starting in '84, I did the Seattle Times Washington poll. And we did a monthly poll, and then it became sort of less often than that. So that was starting in '84. In 1992, I started the Elway Poll, which I thought was a great name for a poll. For that, I actually didn't have a sponsor. I sold subscriptions to it. And so it went along for years. And then in 2018, I partnered with Crosscut.com, which is the online news site that's associated with KCTS Channel 9, Cascade Public Media. So they've been sponsoring it since 2018. And that's all the data that I showed you is from one of those three polls. I do other work for other clients. Most of my work is associations, public clients, public sector clients. I don't work directly in campaigns. So the polling, we do these are all polls of registered voters. I can get a list of registered voters in this state from a company that happens to be in Bothell. They started about the same time I did. which was 1975. And out of their garage, like me, only now they're the biggest company in this country that does this. So I get the voter list, I say I want a random sample of Washington state voters. And then they send us, more than we need, because we have to call a lot of people to get the sample. We do the surveys by telephone, and nowadays, of course, it's landline, less and less, cell phone, and text. So we will text with a link, and people go online. So all of these polls are done in that way. And the sample size is usually 400 to 500, sometimes 6. But most of them are 400-person samples, which, if it's a random sample, gives you a margin of sampling error of plus or minus 5%. So the results that I'm showing you have a margin of error of 5%. That could be 5%, give or take. And that's how we do them.
Hi, Carol Johnson. I'm interested in your opinion of how term limits might change the landscape in the federal system.
Well, we're seeing some new people in charge now. We've got the Speaker of the House in Congress who's pretty new. So that's not a big argument for term limits. It's been tried and argued, and there's certainly something that was said for, if a guy's 90 years old, he shouldn't be running for the Senate again. But there's also something to be said for seniority and institutional memory and people there who know how the place works. So and term limits would be always a churn. And if you set it too short, by the time somebody really learned their way around, they'd be term limited out. And that would leave the power with the bureaucracy and the staff. So that's the argument against. So the best term limits is voters. And 95% of the people in Congress get reelected every year if they run. And when there was, as you know, we tried it here for a while or argued about it for a while, and I heard people say, well, what people want is term limits for those other guys. My congressperson's great, but Congress is a band of thieves, and we need to term limit them. So it's not an easy answer one way or the other, but I sort of was persuaded against it, at least on too short of a term.
Eric Skogsberg, I guess one of the youngest people in here at 40, so if you need any perspectives on...
Isn't it past your bedtime?
Yeah. Whew. I'm curious your perspective on the influence that you've seen social media play in this polarization, because it seems like there's a lot of alignments there with those shifts as social media has grown.
I think it's enormous, and I think underlying a lot of this, and I haven't got direct data on it, but is the fact that we're in our information silos now. I get, most print media is going away almost, and people get news on Instagram, and the algorithms feed you more information than what you just read. So it's harder to break out and get other points of view. And so I think social media has done an enormous amount to further this sort of segmentation and separation that we have, that we find ourselves in. And I don't see it going away. So I'm not sure what the answer to that question is either. There are a lot of really fundamental questions about how we run this country that are in play right now. And that's why I made the comment in there that it may be another generation before the dust really settles, because it all is new and churning right now, and social media is playing a huge role in that. And what's the answer? You can't. You start to say, well, we need to regulate social media. Well, what about free speech? What about all of that? So how are you going to regulate it? Who's going to regulate it? And it is a tough question. I think it is a central question to the era we find ourselves in.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. My name is Tim Wheeler. I live in Sequim, and I'm very active in the Democratic Party, and of course have hopes that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden and the Democrats win big in this coming election. But I watched the graphs and heard what you said, and it seems like what you're talking about is the importance of multi-party democracy, that having more than one party is important to democracy. And it looks to me, when I see not a single statewide office held by a Republican, and you know, it looked like the membership is declining of the Republicans. So my question is, what is the future? How are we going to, what do you see as a way to preserve multi-party democracy?
Yeah, excellent question. And as I was going through this, I was thinking, I'm making an argument for multi-party democracy, it seems like. But we used to have, as I trying to say, at least in part there, we used to have a multi-party democracy, but they were both subsumed within the Republicans and Democrats. So the Republicans and Democrats would have their internal fights, and then they'd band together and it'd be a single choice, or a choice between two candidates. The idea of a multi-party democracy is everybody gets to choose their party, and then the coalitions come together after the election, not before the election. Right now, the coalitions come together behind the candidates and then the parties, and then you get two choices. We're the only country in the world that has just two-party democracy. But I don't know if I'm not sure I'm arguing for that or not, but I can sure see the logic of it. And the two-party system, I did some work some years ago on a third party or independent cause, and what I found was people really like the two-party system. They just don't like either of the parties. So the answer is the change has to take place in the parties somehow. That we need to get somehow away from this tribal situation that we're in, amplified by the social media, so that when Congress is more interested in getting on Fox News or tweeting or getting on MSNBC and than they are in passing a budget. And again, it really all comes down to us. The voters are going to have to demand that, and demand that of candidates, and hold them accountable.
Stuart, we're going into our last question for the evening, and here it is.
Hi, my name's Donna, and I just moved here 3 weeks ago. Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in what you think about ranked choice voting, with both parties becoming so radicalized, left and right. What do you think of how that will affect the vote?
Ranked choice voting is another system that's being proposed to try to deal with this problem that we're talking about. And they tried it in Pierce County. I know it's done other places. They tried it in Pierce County and they abandoned it. And I'm not exactly sure why. They tried it a couple times and it just didn't work out. They did it in Alaska. And so Sarah Palin didn't get elected to Congress. And then the city of Seattle is going to started, I believe, next year. So we'll get some real live experiments with it. In theory, it makes sense. Ranked choice voting is you get the ballot, there's 5 candidates, and you rank them 1, 2, 3. This is my first choice, second choice, third choice. And when they count the ballots, they take all the first choice ballots, and if nobody gets a majority, then they count the second choice ballots, the second choices, and they keep going till somebody gets a majority. So in that case, it's not all or nothing. I don't have to take the bundle. I can say, you know, I really like this person, but I'm going to vote for her second because this guy is, here's my first choice, and he still has an opportunity to get in. And what that is supposed to do for the campaign is reduce the demonization of the opponent, because you want their second votes or their third votes. So you can't trash this candidate over here like we do now, because some of the people out here might choose you second and you could get in. So in theory, it should work. In practice, I think the problem in Pierce County was counting the ballots became a problem, a nightmare, and it's new, and people are used to this two-party system, and you know, a lot of voter education, but a lot of work for the League of Women Voters to be doing, because there'd be a lot of voter education that would need to be done, and but we're going to have some experiments to see in Washington State.
Stuart Elway, thank you again so much for being with us here in Clallam County. Thank you all in the audience. And we will see if Clallam County predicts the president again this next year. Thanks for being here.